Do you dream of getting paid to hack, or are you already a part of a security team and want to take your career further? This is the first of my videos about offensive security and red teams who do just that, where I'm going to dive into the details of how these teams work and how you can improve your own career or get started on your journey into becoming a real professional hacker. Alright, so let's start with a little bit of background information. When we say the word hacker, it conjures up all kinds of imagery about dubious criminal organizations, nation-state cyber attacks, or just mischievous whiz kids causing mischief in their schools. But there's another side to all of this that I want to talk about today, a side that is both professional and legal. I've been in the world of cybersecurity for well over a decade as a professional hacker, and I'm here to demystify what these hacking teams are and how they work. So whether you're just getting started in your career or whether you're already part of a team, I'm sure there will be something in this video for you. Let's start by framing the world of cybersecurity. All of our cybersecurity efforts can be divided into two major categories: offensive and defensive. Think of it like the offense and defense on a sports team. Your defense wants to prevent the opposing offense from making any progress towards their goals. They do that by responding to and preventing whatever efforts they try to use. The offense, on the other hand, is proactively trying to make progress towards a goal in spite of the offense in their way. Except in this case, you or the company you work for are playing both sides at the same time. You're not trying to destroy the opposing team. That does happen, but it's a subject for another video someday. In the world of cybersecurity, your defenses are basically anything that's preventative or responsive in nature. This is what most people probably think about when they're thinking about defending computers. It includes things both on your own computer at home, like antivirus programs, firewalls, to larger things a company might need, like their intrusion detection and threat hunting teams. And if you don't know what those are, that's fine. Those are topics for another day. Now we get into the fun stuff, the offensive security side. This is called offensive security because it's proactive nature, going on the offense to achieve our goals, rather than waiting and responding to another team's actions. These are the practices that I specialize in and are the true subject of this video, getting paid to hack. Okay, so we've already divided cybersecurity into two sides, defensive and offensive, but we can further divide offensive security into two major practices: penetration testing and red teaming. These two practices have a lot of similarities, but are actually quite distinct and serve different purposes. But before we get into that, we need to define some jargon, because without it, we won't be able to truly understand the things I'm going to be talking about. Two important terms to know are vulnerability and exploit, and being able to distinguish between them is critical. So first up, a vulnerability. Simply put, a vulnerability is a weakness in some program or system that can potentially be exploited by attackers to compromise systems or data. Second, importantly, an exploit is some mechanism by which attackers take advantage of a vulnerability. This can be manually done, like performing a certain number of actions in a certain order, or it can be automated with some code that does the job for the attacker. All right, now back to penetration testing and red teaming. I'm going to start with just a basic summary of each one is, and then we'll dive into more details after that. First up, pen testing. Pen testing is an attempt to discover vulnerabilities in a given system by checking for usually well-known vulnerabilities and easily exploitable weaknesses. In practice, pen testing is usually characterized by heavy use of automation, having limited follow-on actions after discovering a vulnerability, normally aiming just to identify them and then report on them, and finally delivering a report after their engagement so that defenders can change their practices, patch systems, etc. to defend against whatever was found. So moving on now to red teams. A red team has a lot of overlap with pen testing, but is typically geared more towards simulating a real-world attack. A red team will often have a much more specific focus, like simulating a specific known threat or cybercrime group. There's all kinds of publicly available information about hacking groups around the world, and your organization will want to leverage the red team to simulate an attack based on their most likely attackers. That'll be determined by what they're known to do or who they're known to target. A red team will use tools that are much more focused in their scope, and rather than reporting on vulnerabilities as they find them, the red team will often actually exploit the vulnerabilities to gain further access, which allows them to demonstrate the true impact of a breach in the network. They will, at the end, just like a pen testing team, generate a report, and at times they'll work hand in hand with defenders during the engagement to help measure response times and help them bolster their defenses. But that's going to be very engagement engagement specific, and every engagement is going to be different. All right, so now that we have at least a basic idea of what each of these groups do, let's dive into a little more detail on how they actually function in a professional context. First up, pen testing. The key here is in the name itself, penetration testing. These pen testing teams are most often primarily concerned with testing a simple layer of defense and detecting vulnerabilities in that defensive layer. This might mean they focus on a single web-facing application, a single network within a larger organization, and they just want to find vulnerabilities in the perimeter of that target, usually not progressing deeper into the environment. That's where things get a little fuzzy and a little red teamy, for lack of a better way to put it. Now, some pen testing teams will continue to operate further if they manage to penetrate the defenses of their target. But in general, pen testing teams are more concerned with just that outer layer of the environment, or a single part of the environment, rather than performing full scope testing of all possible exploitation avenues. Pen testers are rarely, if ever, given carte blanche approval to go after any and every system in an attempt to just hack an organization. Almost every time, these teams have a very strict scope defined before the engagement begins. They have rules of engagement they have to follow, and even timelines they have to follow. That means, yes, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into pen testing, but that's how you keep it legal and safe. Getting that paperwork right can actually be a big challenge in itself, but it's absolutely critical to pen testing successfully. And that's a great topic that I'm going to go into in a future video. On the more fun side of things, pen testing engagements are usually larger scope than a red team engagement. There are often way more targets and way more digital surface area for these teams to cover, which is why they make use of automation. There are tons of software products out there on the market that actually automate a lot of the pen testing lifecycle, where you can just insert your targets and put some parameters about what you want to test, hit a button, and it will perform the engagement for you. Some of these tools will even generate the report at the end for you, so you just have to make it look pretty and deliver it. Job finished. To summarize, the key features of pen testing are that there are limited follow-on actions, it is non-iterative, meaning it's ad hoc. Someone needs a certain thing tested, you test it, you're done. They make aggressive use of automation due to the scope of their engagements, and they use non-specific TTPs. That means they're not emulating any particular actor. They're just trying to test the security of that defensive layer. So with that covered, let's move on to my bread and butter, red teaming. As I've already said a number of times, red teams and pen testing teams have a lot of similarities, but red teams specialize not just in finding vulnerabilities, but exploiting them to simulate a real-world attack. Rather than stopping after a vulnerability is confirmed, red teams will continue to operate deeper into a network, which allows them to demonstrate the true impact of a potential breach against the target. With that said, red teaming is not the Wild West. Just like I mentioned with pen testing, there's tons of paperwork, there are rules of engagement, scopes, limited time windows, etc. All of these are to safeguard the target environment. These red teaming engagements need to be conducted in a way that allows the business to continue operating during the test. There's no accidentally bringing down a production server in a red team engagement. In many cases, red teaming, as opposed to pen testing, will be tasked with emulating a specific threat instead of just going wild and hacking whatever they can, however they can. For example, if you work for an organization that tends to be targeted by some specific cybercrime group, your team may be tasked to emulate that group, use their tools, their tactics, their procedures in order to simulate an attack by them. This helps your customer know with more certainty that they're prepared for that potential occurrence. Red teams are often also asked to work hand in hand with defenders during their engagement. Rather than just generating the report at the end and handing it over, you'll actually work with the defenders, usually called the blue team, during your engagement. That allows them to improve live while you're operating, but also allows you to measure the response times, which will help them improve in the future. One last feature of red teams that really sets it apart from a pen test is persistence. What I mean by persistence is that a red team in many cases is established to provide recurring or ongoing security testing rather than being a one-off or ad hoc testing engagement. This allows red teams to become an integral part of a larger security program and work more closely with defenders in a symbiotic way that produces an overall more robust cybersecurity strategy that could otherwise be achieved if they worked in isolation. So to summarize those major points of red teaming, They make liberal use of follow-on actions. That is, they don't just stop at discovering a vulnerability, they will often use that vulnerability, exploit it to go further into an environment. They are iterative and integrated. They work with the defenders and they conduct their tests over and over. They have live interaction with the defenders, not just producing tickets or reports at the end, but they will work hand in hand during the engagement. And they are persistent. They are part of a recurring overall security strategy rather than being an ad hoc one-off test. All right, so that's red teaming in detail. What now? Like I said, I've got well over a decade of experience on penetration testing teams and red teams. I've joined some from the ground up and helped build them. I've joined some that were industrial scale, well-oiled machines, and I've gained a lot of knowledge and expertise in this domain that I'd like to share. Some ideas for future topics I'm going to cover are the roles on a red team. It's not just a group of hackers who get together to have fun. There are actual roles and responsibilities that need to be defined to make the team work well. How to work with stakeholders. Your team is nothing without its stakeholders and customers. You need people to pay your bills, and managing and working with them is a critical element of running any team. How to build your team. Like I mentioned previously, you can't just get a bunch of hackers in a room. You have to actually recruit, train, continue to train people to keep them sharp and operating well. Information sharing. The information that you get on a red teaming engagement is pretty sensitive because it can expose the vulnerabilities inherent in a business process or the networks of your company. So you need to handle information carefully to distribute it both amongst your team, but also with external stakeholders. And that's another huge topic that I'll cover in a future video. If there's anything else you'd like me to cover, which I do have a ton of other ideas, this is just 4 of them, please let me know and I'll be happy to cover whatever you want. If you found this information interesting to you, please like the video so I'll know that. Offer a comment and I'll be happy to hear from you. If not, I'll see you next time.